Hi there, all you critical thinkers. Welcome to another engaging episode of Critical Mass TV, the show not built on a foundation of self-serving nonsense. Help us inform, energize, and activate for a sane and sustainable future. The business political domination complex has such an effective hammerlock on the marketplace of ideas. What we have entered could easily be called the misinformation age. As long as big propaganda goes unchallenged in the corporate nanny state that we call home, the need only grows for more mixed mental arts for our intellectual self-defense. Many of us realize that allowing ourselves to be led around like children for the benefit of billionaire greed cultists is problematic at best and suicidal at worst. Forgive me for my abuse of acronyms, but the only GMOs we need are genuine, meaningful options. Critical mass is the fewest people required to sustain positive change in the world. The status quo seems at times to be hell-bent for extinction. On with the show. The opinions expressed tonight are not necessarily those of the guests or of the station, even though they should be. So it is Sunday, January 19th, and we are live at the VCAM studios in beautiful Burlington, Vermont. My guest tonight is Matthew Ennis, who was on the show a month ago and who has agreed to return and continue our discussion about genetically modified organisms in our food supply and Vermont's unique role in the ongoing campaign for consumer empowerment and the right to know. The second segment tonight is Art Break with Cathy Hartley. Cathy's guest tonight is local poet Antonia Clark. We're looking forward to hearing some of her work. So the first act tonight is a short video from NOFA, Vermont, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, about important GMO labeling legislation. When we return, I'll be joined by Matthew Ennis, and we will get to work. Can we see that video, Jim?
I'm Dave Rogers. I'm a policy advisor with the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont, NOFA. NOFA is a member of the Vermont Right to Know GMOs Coalition, which is a collaborative project with Rural Vermont, VPIRG, and Cedar Circle Farm. Last May, after months of hard work and the involvement of nearly 10,000 Vermonters who support efforts to label GMO foods, we were able to pass in the House by a decisive margin, H112, a bill that would require the labeling of GMO foods. It was the first time in the nation that such a bill had passed the legislative body. But as significant as this step was, it was only a first step. This bill now has moved to the Vermont Senate, where it is now being considered. But we must redouble our efforts to ensure that it will pass the Senate and then move on to Governor Shumlin's desk for his signature and enactment. At this moment, January 8th, the Vermont Senate Agriculture Committee is considering the bill and taking testimony. Starting now and in the weeks ahead, it'll be very important for Vermonters who support this legislation and their right to know to contact their legislators, to speak with their senators, and also to make their voices heard in the Vermont press and media. On Thursday, the 16th, the Coalition will be holding a GMO rally, teach-in, and lobby day at the State House with Vermonters who want to become and remain engaged in this effort. Scores of Vermonters have already registered, and I'll have more to say about this in a minute. A majority of the processed packaged foods on our market shelves are made with GMO materials. Thousands of Vermonters have legitimate concerns about the safety of these materials. But without labels, it's very difficult for them to know if the food that they buy and feed to their families contain genetically engineered materials. In fact, the UVM poll found that 90% of Vermonters, more than 90% of Vermonters, want foods labeled for GMOs. But over the last year, many of the largest chemical, biotechnology, and food manufacturing corporations, Monsanto, Dow, General Foods, Kraft, on down the line, have spent tens of millions of dollars in different states to defeat GMO labeling initiatives. In fact, they worked hard last year in the Vermont State House to kill the bill when it was in the House, but the voices of Vermonters trumped the power of their money and their lobbyists. These corporations are already hard at work in the Vermont State House and beyond to kill the bill in the Senate this year. We expect that they'll bring the same high-priced lobbying and disinformation tactics to Vermont in an effort to kill this bill. But as in the House, they'll not be successful. They may have a great deal of money and power, but they're no match for the voices and wishes of thousands of Vermonters who contact their representatives. So let's get going. We invite all Vermonters to come to the State House between the hours of 12 and 5 o'clock on January 16th, Thursday, for a GMO rally, teach-in, and lobby day. The day will include opportunities to learn more about the issues, demonstrate support for the Vermont labeling bill, and attendees will also have an opportunity to connect with their senators and elected representatives, speak with members of the press, connect with members of their community, and basically become engaged in the campaign. To learn more about the GMO Lobby Day and register, just go to the Vermont Right to Know webpage, vtrighttoKnow.org. You'll find information about how to register for the day, you'll find information about the agenda for the day, and you'll find lots more information about these issues. This will be an important, informative, and fun day. We hope to see you and your neighbors there.
All right. So, hi Matthew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Thanks for having me again, Brad.
You bet. Thank you for coming back. Obviously, for the viewers, last Thursday was the rally at the State House, and it was a large turnout, and there were a lot of great speakers, and we're gonna talk about that in a few minutes. But first, I just want to ask Matthew quickly, how did you get involved in the GMO issue?
I've been involved with it on and off since 2000. Mm-hmm. And I first got involved with a town meeting campaign. We got over 80 towns to pass resolutions in Vermont asking for a moratorium on planting GMO crops. Most of those resolutions asked for that, and some of them were asking for labeling of the food. So I got involved with that campaign pretty heavily. And then I was working on staff at rural Vermont from 2001 through 2004. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to get a moratorium passed through the legislature. And we had a lot of lobbying from Monsanto and other biotech companies against that, so that didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. And then we worked on something called the Farmer Protection Act, which meant if farmers were contaminated by GMO pollen that they didn't want, they could sue the manufacturer of the GMO products.
Sure.
And that passed the Vermont House and Senate, only to be vetoed by Governor Jim Douglas at the time, back in 2006. So that took the wind out of our sails for a while, but then people started working on the issue again a couple of years ago to try to get a labeling law through in Vermont.
Yeah.
And I started working on that, and I was also active from here calling people in California, both in California and in Washington State, in 2012 and 2013 when they had ballot initiatives trying to get labeling. So I worked on those campaigns as well. Mm-hmm. And now I'm pretty involved working for the labeling effort in Vermont.
Right.
As well as other aspects of the issue.
Yeah. So the labeling, again, to quickly explain that to the viewers, that's a label on the product that would be on the supermarket shelf, identifying it as a product that would contain genetically modified organisms, or a GMO label.
That's correct. Yeah, it's just for it's for processed foods, mm-hmm. and it's only for the crops, the things that have the crops: the corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, cottonseed oil, perhaps. It's not for. Unfortunately, it's not going to cover animal products because the animals that are eating GMO grain, it's in the dairy products, it's in the meat, but they're not going to cover that with this law.
Right.
But it's a starting point.
It's a really
good
step.
It's a good step. Yes.
and it's doubly a good step too. And I think the reason that industry is willing to spend tens of millions of dollars to resist it, the food processing industry, is they know that an informed consumer, or at least a high percentage of them, are not going to buy the product. So there's a lot of fear basically at that industrial level, which leads them to feel that keeping it secret is a better idea, so they don't lose sales. So it's a great way to start to actually get the industry to realize that there's a huge sector of the marketplace that doesn't want them.
Right, and in the ballot initiatives in California and Washington, they spent $46 million in California.
Wow.
and $22 million in Washington against labeling. The yes side on each of those campaigns spent between 7 and 8 million. So they were outspent almost 7 to 1 in California and outspent almost over 3 to 1 in Washington. And it was the Grocer Manufacturers Association and the biotech companies that combined to put up that kind of money
to fight
labeling.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay.
Yeah.
So food processors in conjunction with biotech, pooling their funds to resist just an honest labeling initiative.
Right, and we expect we're going to see some influx of money against our labeling effort in Vermont as well.
Right.
We expect to see that over the next couple months.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening in Vermont now with, because as the video said, on January 8th, the Senate Agriculture Committee took up began the debate, started hearing testimony about H-112, which is the bill that was passed in the Vermont House last year.
Yeah.
So what's the procedure now? The Senate Ag Committee looks at it, and then where does it go from there?
When it passes out of Senate Ag Committee, then it'll go to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like they won't take it up until after crossover date, which is early March, around town meeting.
Okay.
And that's sort of traditional that a bill that's already been passed by the House won't be completely vetted before town meeting day, which is crossover day.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing abnormal about that.
Okay.
So there'll be time in between when we have, we'll have time to pressure people on the Judiciary Committee around this issue. There is a concern, there is talk in the State House about having a trigger clause, which means that we'll need other states involved before our law will come into effect. And that's exactly the case. What's happened, there are GMO labeling laws that passed in Maine and in Connecticut, but they both require other states, like 4 or 5 other states, to be involved before they can go ahead. And the problem with that is that we're waiting on New Hampshire and New York and Massachusetts to do something.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, we've been waiting too long already to get this going. And there's a movement at the national...
75% of our food contains GMO materials, we heard him say.
Right, and there's more crops coming, and we just feel like this has gone on too long, and we want to try to turn this thing around and get more people informed by having labeling.
Mm-hmm.
So we want Vermont to do a standalone law and stand up for what's right in order to have labeling, and then hopefully other states will do their own standalone laws, and Vermont won't be alone.
Right, leading with
this.
a little bit of bravery in the face of lawsuits.
Yeah.
So I just read that it was Governor Paul LePage did sign a bill, signed it into law in the state of Maine. It's the second state to do so. I guess Connecticut did that first, and then it will not take effect until 5 contiguous states, so not just 5 states that are touching each other, enact GE labeling laws. Now, is that lawsuit insurance against like Monsanto? Is that the reason why there's that contiguous state clause to have more parties in the suit possibly, and be able to resist the corporate onslaught of lawsuits?
I think that's the theory, but I think that I mean, I don't know why the biotech companies couldn't sue each state individually anyway.
Right.
So it's going to be a battle, but if it's just a question of more states being brave to stand up for their own rights and take a stand, and I think that'll be a statement. I mean, right now nationally, there's no political will to do a national labeling law. There's
Right.
legislation introduced, but it's not going anywhere. And actually, the grocers and the biotech companies are trying to get a voluntary labeling law through, which will be toothless. And they're also trying to prevent states from crafting their own labeling laws. So they're trying to push that through. So that's why we feel like it's really important for us to take a stand now, that it's
Yeah.
already gone on too long. And
Right. All it leads to is more waiting. I think. I mean, the subtext of the 5 states thing would be a political solution inside the main legislature to try to get Republicans and Democrats to actually both be involved in the bill. Some of that could be negotiating, and this is what we'll do.
yeah,
All it does, though, is delay any action whatsoever. It's if you pass the law and then basically you're just going to wait.
yeah,
And nothing may happen. And I also read it when polled, 90 to 95% of Americans do support GMO labeling legislation, just a basic labeling law. So it is that high as far as anything that polls 95% is, pretty much of a not a done deal by any means, but it shows an incredible will amongst U.S. citizens to have that legislation.
right. And in the case of the ballot initiatives in Washington and California, they lost both around 51 to 49%. And the big reason they lost is because there was so much negative advertising on television, and a lot of people don't know about GMOs and what's in their food. And,
Right.
and then they hear, they were saying their food's going to cost more because the labels, and that's not really true because they label for other things. So people were getting misinformation and just going with that, and that's why those ballot initiatives barely lost.
Right, because people don't have a huge grip on the science, but they do understand that just that simplistic argument, your food's going to get even more expensive.
Right, which isn't true.
No.
But that's what they went with.
Right. Not based on that, maybe based on other corporate policies. I mean, our food prices have been going up like crazy for years.
Yeah.
But it's not because of, not because of labeling laws. So, I wanted to talk about the rally the other day. So last Thursday, January 16th, the collaborative project known as Vermont Right to Know GMOs and people from all over Vermont came to the State House to rally and lobby their senators in support of labeling genetically engineered foods. Last year, the Vermont House of Reps became the first legislative body in the country to pass a GMO labeling bill, and the debate now moves to the Senate, which we have discussed in the Agricultural Committee. Eloquent arguments for labeling were heard from Senator Dave Zuckerman, a member of the Agricultural Committee, VPIRG, or the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, consumer protection advocate Falco Schilling, Andrea Stander, the executive director of Rural Vermont, and Dave Rogers of NOFA Vermont. Kat Buxton of Cedar Circle Farms said, as of last year, 50 countries required regulations on GMO foods, and now 64 countries do. Big Food is spending millions in the U.S. to fight a simple, reasonable, and prudent label. Vermont is no place for corporate bullies to have any sway. Vermonters need to encourage our Senate to be brave, to stand with the people, and to pass H-112 as it is written and put the darn label on the food. I like that. You said Kat, and that's pretty typical
I've known her
of
for
her.
a long time.
Yeah.
She's been working on this pretty much as long as I have.
Yeah. There's another development that I turned up, and it's just a recent development. The United States Supreme Court will not hear the case of the Organic Seed Growers and Trade Association versus Monsanto, even though lower courts ruled that the case had merit. Organic farmers had been seeking means to protect themselves from Monsanto lawsuits after their crops are contaminated by GE crops grown nearby. Any contamination over 1% under current law, and Monsanto can and sometimes does sue. This high court, which gave corporations the ability to patent life forms in 1980, and under Citizens United in 2010 gave corporations the power to buy their way to election victories, has now, in 2014 denied farmers the basic right of protecting themselves from the notorious patent bully Monsanto, said Jim Gerritsen, Maine organic seed farmer and president of the OSG-ATA. So if Monsanto can patent seeds for financial gain, they should be forced to pay for contaminating a farmer's fields, not be allowed to sue them, said Dave Murphy, founder of Food Democracy Now! And there have been significant contamination events in Oregon, Washington, and Canada, where entire harvests are rejected by Japanese buyers for a total loss to the farmers. They are then, also exposed to Monsanto threat and intimidation. I think everybody remembers Starlink corn and Liberty Link rice contamination. Those two products, I love the Liberty Link and Starlink names. I think that's pretty Orwellian. But that already cost farmers and the food companies themselves over $2 billion. Wow. So, it is truly amazing that, can you think of another industry that could have a byproduct, which is, in this case is the pollen that has that genetic material in it, to just let it waft out over your neighbors and other people's surrounding land, contaminate their food, take their ability to sell away, and then not be liable for that. That's really rare in the industrial world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of patent law ruling over everything else. And there have been farmers that have been sued by Monsanto who didn't want to grow GMO crops, but their crops got contaminated, and then they had to settle with Monsanto and pay them money because their crops got contaminated. I mean, that's just not right.
It's just not right.
And there was one case in Canada where the guy took it all to the Canadian Supreme Court. His canola crop got contaminated. Mm-hmm. And he replanted it, not knowing what was going on, but then he fought Monsanto, and he lost 5-4 because of patent law.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's just not right. But that's what this lawsuit was about, trying to stop that, and unfortunately it didn't work. That's what our Farmer Protection Act was about, trying to protect farmers from being, contamination, but we haven't got anywhere on that front yet. That'll come back, though. We're still working on that issue. It's not in the forefront right now.
Right. So Monsanto clearly has said that it will sue the state, and basically in a show of corporate intimidation. Then Maine and Connecticut have passed laws, but have those trigger clauses that prevent enactment until more states pass similar legislation. And Monsanto has definitely used lawsuits and threats for over 20 years to force unlabeled GE foods on an unsuspecting public.
Yeah.
That's 20 years of having undeclared ingredients basically in the food, and also to intimidate farmers into buying their GE seeds and hormones and et cetera, et cetera. So Vermont did become the first state in 1994 to require mandatory labels on milk and dairy products from cows injected with recombinant BGH, or bovine growth hormone. Monsanto's minions sued in federal court and won a judge's decision that dairy corporations have a First Amendment right to remain silent on whether or not they are injecting their cows with RBGH, even though RBGH has been linked to severe health damage in cows and increased cancer risk in humans, and is banned around the world, including Europe and Canada. Now, as far as GMOs, is the European Union, is there a ban on GMO foods in the European Union? Do you know how that works?
There is labeling. I don't know if there's an outright ban. Like, there might be some processed food that has it, but there's really very little GMOs being grown in the European Union.
Right.
It's pretty much been kept out.
Mm-hmm.
Around the BGH, though, because when Vermont that law got struck down in court, it was because they didn't have as much of a claim of a health risk at
Right.
the time. More evidence came out later, whereas there's evidence coming out of Europe that's pointing towards problems with GMOs that could help our case, although there's no independent studies happening in the United States.
Right, we covered that last time. There's not a lot of science out there. It's
Right, but there's science there. But there's from Europe. Scientists are saying there's nothing conclusive. They think there are issues, and there are studies that are showing big problems.
right. There is evidence of big problems, but
Yeah.
you have to prove that. You cannot just put it out there. These
Right.
are peer-reviewed studies.
Yeah. So they're trying to get more and more evidence out there, but I think it'll help our case in court compared to the BGH case.
Right. Is it legal now to label a dairy product in Vermont that it contains bovine or does not contain bovine growth hormone? Do you know that?
I'm not sure, but I
Sort of
feel like
zinging
I've
you.
seen that on some. I think if they phrase it in a certain way, that it's legal.
Okay.
And actually, because of what Vermont did and stood up against BGH and tried to label it, it actually had an effect nationwide and throughout North America, and it's being used a lot less now than it was.
Yeah. Well, it
And
causes it causes a very high degree of infections in cows. I think that's what it
Yeah.
sort of hurt the marketplace value of it.
Right.
And overproducing milk and economically sometimes doesn't make any sense.
So it's not being used very much anymore.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So we're hoping the same thing can happen with GMO labeling.
Yeah. So we just have just a couple minutes left here, a minute and a half. What do you see coming up next with the state, or where do we go from here?
Well, on Tuesday the 28th, there's a public hearing with the Senate Agriculture Committee in the evening. The details will be posted on the VT Right to Know website, which is vtrighttoknow.org. I'm also thinking about other ways to tackle the issue personally, and I'm approaching restaurants and bakeries and trying to educate them about the issue, and then suggest ways they could change some ingredients they're using, so they're using less GMO ingredients in their
Which I told you
in their
it's
food.
worked on me. We're already working around our little deli to try to figure out, how we can improve our non-GMO content.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about corn, soy, canola, and sugar are the big ones I'm thinking about, and how people can change some of those ingredients so they're using less GMO
Right.
ingredients.
And brag about it if you are.
Yeah, and then advertise that they're
Yeah.
moving towards GMO free,
Yeah.
moving in that direction. I think that would be a real boon for their business, actually. And then another thing I'm thinking about, there are phone apps out there that are available to people that when they go in a supermarket, they can use the barcode and find out if a product has GMOs in them. And there are different ones out there, and I'm trying to do some research on them.
So
I'm
they
hoping-
already exist.
They
as
do
an app.
exist.
Okay, wow.
So I'm hoping that maybe they can get more widely distributed in the
Yeah.
state and also across the country. And lastly, I'm also thinking in terms of divestment campaign
Yeah.
against agricultural biotech. And it's not something I've moved on yet, but I think that it's a way, basically I'm thinking boycott and divest. How do we keep our money from going towards agricultural biotech? We don't buy the GMO food, and ultimately we don't invest in their companies. And
Yeah.
that's the direction I see us going, because labeling is only going to do so much.
Yeah.
And it's going to take time before, even if we pass a labeling law, it'll take time before it's enacted, and it'll probably have a court battle. And so we need to move on other fronts at this point, and that's what I'm sort of scheming on. At this
Okay.
point.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate it. Here, let me
Thanks
shake
a
your
lot.
hand. Yeah, we're going to move on to Art Break now with Cathy Hartley.
Have you read the news? Have you let it get you yet? People there are saying how bad you're gonna get. And I've been calling to the sky. sail. In these times of struggle, you can hear the children cry.
Hi, and welcome to Art Break. This is a show all about the arts. There's been lots of great guests on my show. We've had musicians and artists, painters, writers, poets today. I've had jewelers, and last time on the show was my guest named Mateo Palmer, and I'd like to give a little shout out to Mateo. He was written up in the 7 days this week. He has a great CD called Out of Nothing, and I'm just so excited for him. Anyway, thanks, and hope you sell lots of CDs, Mateo. So today we have a poet named Toni Clark. Welcome, Toni.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
She's a writer and a poet and a teacher, and we're going to talk about your book. You have a book that you have had published called Smoke and Mirrors. And let's just let me ask you a couple questions first here.
Sure.
So how long have you been writing?
Well, just about forever. I started writing poems when I was a little kid. My father always read a lot of poems to me. He had a lot of poems memorized, and I grew up loving poetry. I wrote a lot as a child. I wrote a lot through high school. I took a lot of creative writing classes in college. And then I didn't write for a long time after college. But in the 1990s, I started taking classes again, and eventually I wrote some short fiction. I published some short stories, and then I started teaching writing. And it was when I was teaching that I kind of came back to poetry. I was asked to teach poetry writing, and that brought me back, and I realized that poetry really was my first love, and I've been writing poetry ever
Especially
since.
since your dad wrote it. You
Yeah,
read it
yeah.
when you
He
were
read
a child.
Yeah, he read a lot of poetry.
Yeah,
to
that
me,
would have
yeah.
a huge influence on you.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you taught for a little while?
I did. I taught at Community College of Vermont for a few semesters.
Great
It's been a
college.
while. It's been a while.
Yeah, good, great college to teach at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do work with other poets online.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots and lots of poetry workshops and classes and forums online, and they're at all levels for beginners
How
to,
fun.
intermediates, accomplished writers, and work with poets.
So
there.
access to everybody.
Yep.
So there's one online,
This is the
Poetry
poetry
group.
forum that I co-administer. Is called the Waters Poetry.
right,
And it's free. Anybody can participate. You can go there and kind of hang around and lurk for a while and see what it's like.
right, so you can just Google the Waters.
The Waters Poetry, and it should come up first. Yeah.
Right, oh, that sounds like so much fun. And then you can figure out what's going on
Mm-hmm.
from there. An online writers group, so that sounds really neat. Yep, well, you have written a lot of poetry.
I have.
And so we're going to have Toni read a lot of her poetry. So we're going to just kind of go right into it because
Okay.
we want to hear a lot of them. You have another book coming out soon too, in September.
Yes, I'll have a full-length collection of my poems in September. This book, Smoke and Mirrors, is called a chap book, which is just a short book of poems. It's about 24 pages or so.
Mm-hmm. And this one that's going to be coming out in September is a longer
Yeah, yeah.
book. Oh, cool. Can't wait to see it and read it. Okay, so let's start out with the first poem. And this
Okay.
one is called, what are we doing first?
Home Permanent.
Home Permanent.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I did read this. It's very, very good. Okay, go for it.
The poems in this book are some of my most autobiographical ones. Not all the poems I write are autobiographical,
Right.
but these are a lot of poems about my family. And my poet friends tease me that my favorite topic is dead people. And a lot of the poems in this book seem sad or nostalgic, but most of them are about my family. But they're my way of keeping my family present in my life. But anyway, this one's called Home Permanent.
Okay.
And boy, did I hate those things when I was a kid, all that yanking.
they
and
stunk.
Yeah. But now I have this really nostalgic feeling about the smell of permanent lotion. I
Right.
really like it now. Okay, home permanent. My mother was the one who wanted curls on me, so I was made to sit straight-backed and still on catalogs stacked on a chair. She wound my hair relentlessly around the plastic rods we'd sorted out by size, pulled so tight tears stung my eyes. The thin pink lotion burned my scalp, dripped into my ears. Complaining only makes it worse, she said. She'd learned that lesson well enough herself. She said to hold my head up, not to squirm or whine. She said she'd prayed that I'd be born with natural curl, but I was cursed with hair like hers. All of our lives, we'd have to take pains and suffer for beauty's sake.
You can just smell that perm
Oh,
smell when
I
you're reading it. That
know.
was very...
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Your next one is going to be Time Being.
This is the time being, and when I was young, I spent a lot of time in the summers at my grandmother's house in upstate New York. And it was always a kind of a scary place, but a fascinating place, and it was full of all kinds of odds and ends and strange objects. And this is called The Time Being. My grandmother's house was full of breakable objects: glass lamps, porcelain dolls, bottles of pastel lotions. My sister and I promised to keep our hands to ourselves, not to go looking for trouble. In the spare bedroom, we prayed for our parents to change their minds. We hated the chamber pot, the rattling windows, mice skittering the floorboards. Grandma let the fire go out, believing the cold would keep us healthy and banish bad dreams. I heard the lonely squeak of her bed springs, her mumbled prayers, the ongoing argument she carried on with no one in particular, her final sigh of resignation. We were there for the time being. Tree shadows flickered on the walls, old women shaking their sorry heads. That night, our parents sped across one state line after another, looking for a place to start over. Under the bedclothes, my sister's hand curled in mine like a question mark, but I couldn't think of an answer that wouldn't have been a lie.
Let me just ask you one question about this. When it says looking for a place to start over, what does that mean?
Looking for a place to start their lives over, where everything would be different and
And you were
fresh
staying at
and
your
new.
grandmother's house while
yeah.
they were deciding that?
Right. Well,
Oh, okay. I like that one. I like
we
that
felt abandoned there, I guess. It was
Temporarily, right,
scary.
it was just scary,
Yeah,
right.
we didn't want to be left there.
Yeah, that would bring a lot of emotion. Your next one is Travel.
Well, yes, I'd like to read two poems about my sister in particular. Travel is the first one.
Okay.
And these are two of the most emotional poems in the book for me. I sometimes get a little choked up reading them, but my sister died when she was quite young. She was in her early 40s, and so it's been a long time, but anyway,
She
I'll
was
just
your
read it.
sister, right.
And this poem in particular, Travel, is based on, it starts with a real incident. When my father had died a few years before my sister did, and when she knew she was going to die, she had a dream about him one night that he came to her, and she said it was so real. It was just like he was standing there in the room, and he talked to her in the dream, and this is in the poem what he said to her.
Okay.
Travel. My sister heard from them. The dead stood at the foot of her bed, leaned in doorways, lingered in the hall. Never done with earthly errands, endless business and pleasure trips, they often paused to whisper advice, deliver news, and offer tips. Once, our father appeared, serene, boyish, beaming with an ease we'd never seen. He wore a new green parka and carried a ring of keys. and when she asked, he told her in a word what it was like. Travel, he said. He could go anywhere, and he was happy, so happy, to live the way he'd always wanted to live. That's when she claimed to know, to understand. That's when she began to talk of destinations and departures, and her head was filled with plans. She'd travel light, forget her native language, learn to navigate at night, follow winding rivers, shifting sands. She studied charts and maps, spoke less and less, strained to hear voices in her dreams. She woke most days more focused on the road ahead. Take care of my babies, she said. The faraway look in her eyes made all my reasonable arguments sound more and more like lies. I've heard no voices. No one has come to tell me what it's like. Dreams are just dreams, the usual still life scenes, news I already know. I jingle my keys for the babies and think about where I want to go.
So writing poetry is kind of a nice outlet, way to get your emotions out, write it down on paper.
Sure it is, yeah, it can be a very cathartic experience, yeah. And one more about my sister, which is not based on actual events, but it's more trying to put the emotions into words. You
Okay.
know? Yeah. And this is the title poem called Smoke and Mirrors. My sister dressed in the colors of water and stone, walked out on foggy mornings in search of misted rivers, folded herself into low-lying clouds. She insisted that none of this was for the purpose of deception. It's a matter of becoming accustomed, she said. It's incremental. She studied the art of the graceful sleight, to take her leave without notice, without a visible stirring of air, as if dying were only another illusion. The hard part is what to do with the body, she told me. The rest is nothing. It's easy to disappear.
Wow.
Oh, no,
When you
sad.
read it, it's so intense. It's beautiful. Those are just absolutely beautiful. Very nice.
Well,
And those are all from. You have a couple
I
more.
have a couple more,
Yeah.
and these are not quite as intense. This is one a little bit about my own aging, you know, the older we get, the
What?
stiffer the joints, the thinner the bones, the saggier the skin. And this one is called Orthopedics.
Okay.
I've heard how easily bones break, disintegrate, how hard they are to build, set right. You hear every day of bad backs that will never give up their pain, no matter how strong the rods of steel the spine is made to bear. Of crippled limbs, arthritic hands, diseases that knob and hobble. An old woman has a hold on me, leeches my calcium day by day, cackles that she'll steal my finger joints, crack my ribs one by one. She lays her bony hand along my skull, taking my full measure, biding her time.
Ooh. Ooh.
She'll
that's
get
a
me.
good
I know
one.
she'll get me. And I'd like to read one more from the book.
Okay.
And this is called Famous Last Words. It's about my father and his last words in a way, but it's really a tribute to him and to his sense of humor. And it's the way I always think of him.
Okay.
And the poem includes a lot of last words of famous people. Some of them you might have heard before.
Neat.
Famous last words. The dying make no bones about it. It's life they want to talk about. Business as usual. News and weather, sports, the sound of rain striking the window pane, the most recent hole-in-one, stock prices, interest rates, errands to run. The dying talk of elephants, veal pies, rising fog, tiresome wallpaper, shorebirds at low tide. Chekhov spoke fondly of champagne, Bogart of scotch. Dylan Thomas totted up his whiskeys, satisfied. They often speak of the dark or ask for the light to be left on or off. They may cry out, "I'm still alive," or more soberly reflect on things they should have done or said, bills still unpaid, books left unread. My father, a joker even at the end, said, "Don't call me, I'll call you." It's kept the thought of him alive, it's true. Hope springs eternal, just like fear, each time the phone rings.
That's great. That's really great. Do we have time, do you think, for me to read the Unfinished Marilyn?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just
Would
going
you
to
like me
zing
to
right into it. Yes.
Tell you a bit.
Tell us a little bit about this first.
When you probably all know there was a famous photograph of Marilyn Monroe in the nude in the 1953 December issue of Playboy. Now, I don't remember Playboys being around the house when I was growing up, but somehow my father got hold of this one, and he had been taking art lessons by correspondence courses, and he decided to paint this picture of Marilyn Monroe in the nude, which is what we always called it, Marilyn Monroe in the nude. And my mother did not like this, and she made him take his painting to the basement.
Oh, okay. I dreamed of her for years, the portrait my father painted from Playboy's centerfold. Before things got out of hand, my mother banished them both, Dad and his sultry mistress, to the cellar. He'd spend evenings stroking her arm, softening her gaze. Perhaps he saw there what he could lose, grappling with her hard mystery. He gave her up, put away his brushes for good. She was the last thing we found when we cleaned out the house. Damp and moldy, she was stashed behind the shelves of canning jars against the cement wall. For decades, she knelt there, shivering, one too long arm bent painfully behind her head, skin blotchy, her dull hair only underpainted. I packed the jars into a box for the dump, their dusty contents, once peaches or yams, bobbed in syrup. I glanced at her, propped up against the wall in the shaft of late sun, awkward and ordinary and tired of it all, and saw for the first time that she had my mother's eyes. Dry leaves rustled in the window well, and the crimson curtain behind her rippled in a trick of light.
Thank you.
Love that
Thank
one.
you.
I love that one.
Nice reading.
Why, thank you. So let's go on to some other poetry that you have, maybe a little more lighthearted.
Yes, I do write lighter
You
poems.
do?
I write some funny ones, in fact.
Okay.
And so, although maybe to transition from reading poems about the dead, I'll read you my poem called Talking with the Dead.
Okay, that's way
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, way different.
Okay.
A little more lighthearted. And this is a sonnet. I write both free verse and formal poetry. This one is a sonnet.
Okay.
It's called Talking with the Dead. Lately, I've been talking with the dead, who, to my great surprise, are rather witty and always eager to pick up the thread of conversation. It would be a pity not to take their excellent advice on death and taxes, tips on making money. They say it's true that God does not play dice, or drink, or dance, and he's not very funny. Those who were just dying to get free of life now want to tell me all the time how easy living really was. They see, at last, it beats hell out of the sublime. My questions about angels sour their mood, and they've nothing good to say about the food.
Oh, that's great. That is very good, lighthearted poetry. So do you ever write poetry like on this online poetry place and then turn it into like some of your favorite
That's
poems?
where I write most of my drafts.
Okay.
Yep. And It's a place where a group of us, quite a good-sized group of us, one of the forums at the Waters is for writing a poem a day for 7 days or a poem a day for 30 days. And every year in April and November, we have these 30-day stints. And we write drafts, and everybody knows their drafts. We don't critique them. We just point out what we like about them.
Nice.
And we encourage each other. And at the end of the month, you've got 30 drafts, and a lot of them you'll just end up throwing away.
Right.
But I usually get some good poems out of
And
it.
anybody can get on the
Anybody
site.
can do it. It's free.
That's exciting.
Sure.
Yeah. Very neat. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, so let's see. Onward we go.
Onward.
Yeah, we have a few more minutes. We're going to try to cram
Okay,
as many.
cram
of
in
these
a couple
poems.
more.
Yeah. Okay, what's the next
Well,
one?
this
called?
one, I thought I would give you an example of, I often use scientific subjects as ideas for my poems, and I'd been thinking one day about properties of light, about reflection and refraction and diffusion, and I did a little research, and I wrote this poem called Optical Aberrations and Other Anomalies.
Okay.
Apparent motion can be a trick of light, the displacement of stars, a blurring at the edge of sight, the way the angle of rain changes as you move through it, properties of aquamarine and those you bring to it, refraction, reflection, a slick sidestep, side slip between what we know and guess, between the seer and the seen, the sleights of art, illusions wrought by the practiced dancer, the deflection of a question that has no answer.
Try to say that poem 3 times real fast.
Yeah, I know. The
No, that's
slick
great.
side slip.
Very good. Okay, so we have time for a couple more.
Okay.
So The Forester's Wife.
Okay, this is a new poem, which this is not a published one. I just wrote it this past November when I was writing this poem a day for 30 days. And this is another way that poems sometimes happen. A phrase just popped into my head. I don't know where it came from, a gift. And the phrase was, "He wooed me in Greenwood." I didn't even know what I was thinking of when it popped into my head, but I started thinking about trees, and I did some research, and I looked up lots of names of trees, and I put lots of them in the poem and called it The Forester's Wife. And it's a love poem.
Oh, very nice.
The Forester's Wife. He wooed me in Greenwood, beneath beech and butternut, among fir and pine, sang of aspen and ash, dogwood, juniper, yellowwood, and yew. His tune was the wind and spring leaves, his hands rough as bark, gentle as leaf brush. He showed me seedling, sapling, and shrub, taught me to love the tender stem, the budding branch. At night he sighed his litany into my sleep, sugar maple, sweet gum, true love tree, until it became the scaffold of my dreams, the understory of our days. And in the fall, the needles and nutshell, the fleshy fruit, dark canopy overhead, rustle of the forest night, its floor, our bed. O heartwood, O passion oak, I whispered in his ear, O flame in the woods.
Ooh, that's beautiful.
I didn't know there is a tree called Flame in the Woods.
Ah. Sounds like a. What does it look like?
Oh,
Red leaves.
I think so.
So let's go on to Haunting My Husband.
Okay.
Okay, this ought to be good.
Yeah, this is dedicated to my husband. I was thinking of what it would be like if I got a chance to haunt him.
We all want to know that.
Haunting my husband.
Okay.
Nothing much has changed. He looks right through me. Doesn't hear a word I say. Forgets all my instructions, where we keep the strainer, how to fold the sheets. I trail him room to room like our old hound dog, waiting for a welcome. Come here, old girl. I'm careful to walk around furniture I could easily pass through, wondering what trick to try next. He may lift his head, as though sensing a barometric shift, a thickening of air, but it's always nothing. He shrugs, carries his empty cup to the sink. I still wrap myself around him, rubbing my cheek against his stubbly morning face, and can almost feel the scrape of whiskers. And sometimes at night, dazed by dream, he still reaches out to me before I resolve into my true form, a lingering memory.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
You have to kind of put yourself in another dimension to write some
Yeah.
of these. Thank you, Tony. All right, so Tony's poetry is definitely beautiful. If you'd like to find her book, Smoke and Mirrors, you can find this at the Finishing Line Press. Maybe we could put up that website. Yep, Finishing Line Press, and there's the address and the website, and it's also available at Amazon, www.amazon.com. Or we can
Or people can email me
email Tony.
for information
Right.
if you don't want to write down the.
Right, and I'm not sure if we have that up on the screen or not, but it's Tony Clark at earthlink.net. Yes, there we
There you
go.
go.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tony. That was really fun. I love your writing. It's beautiful, it's funny, it's thoughtful. I can't wait to get on that website and do a little of that poetry myself. And thank you all for joining me on Art Break. Contact me at artbreakvermont@gmail.com. And I'd love to have you on my show. It's all about the arts. And thank you all very, very much. Maybe if we
Thank you.
have another minute, maybe we could go out
Would
with
you like
another.
to hear one
Yes,
more?
Go out with a poem.
Oh, this is a good one.
Okay.
Afterlife. And this started because my husband gives me a hard time about spending so much time online. And one time I turned around and snapped at him, I'm going to live online when I get old.
Oh, cool.
And I thought, ooh, that's iambic pentameter. I'll write a sonnet. Afterlife. I'm going to live online when I get old. I hope the nursing homes all have high-speed connections, wireless internet, email with good spam blockers, and RSS feed. At last, I'll have uninterrupted hours to read the boards, to roam the blogosphere, a password as my passport, an ID for every portal in the new frontier. And this is all the immortality I wish for. On the far side of the screen, I'll leave my electronic fingerprints so that at last, part of me might, unseen, slip through some cyber door that's left ajar and live forever through my avatar.
Yay, I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.